I'd like to introduce Alka Shodari, and Alka is now a veteran of presenting because she presented at the North American Society for the Study of Personality Disorder, and she's going to talk about her experience. New slides. She's done new slides, and I hope you give her your full attention. These are two very brave young ladies.
Hi, so I also have BPD, and I'm going to speak towards how the TARA method really helped put words to the pain that we go through and helped me understand. And a lot of the things are similar to what Maria spoke about, but first of all, who I am, I'm 21, I'm a full-time NYU student right now. I've been diagnosed with 5 disorders, as is common, I learned with Valerie, and I've been in therapy for a total of 7 years, whereas I was diagnosed with BPD when I was 18. I'm lucky that it only took me 4 years to get the right diagnosis, where it takes on average about 10. And I did 4 years of cognitive behavioral therapy and 4 months of ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. And I'm currently in group and individual dialectical behavioral therapy. So before TARA, I would Google BPD. I looked up information on NAMI and The Buddha and the Borderline, written by Kara Van Gelder. I'm sure everyone in this room is familiar with that book. It really helped me a lot. When I read it, I thought, this is really similar to me. This is my story, and she's telling us it's not normal, so it can't be normal for me. As Valerie spoke on the alexithymia, before TARA, I didn't know how to put what I was going through into words. I really had no idea, and I looked at quotes. Words really have been powerful for me. And one of the quotes that I fell in love with was, "Somewhere on the brink of insanity, I fell in love with the idea of destroying myself." It was a very self-destructive time, and another one that really resonated was, "Sometimes I feel so many things at once, I want to vomit." Now, after having attended the TARA workshop, I will never be able to get Valerie's periscope out of my head, because that's what feelings look like when we're hypervigilant. So these quotes were actually surprisingly, they showed a lot about what I was going through, even though I didn't realize it. And with my relationships, they were always pretty tough. Even now they are, obviously, everyone struggles, but primarily with my parents and my close family members, I noticed there were differences in the way my parents reacted and interacted with my brother, as opposed to the way they interact with me. I have one brother, and he got the good end of the gene pool, apparently, because he is a lawyer and very, very pragmatic, and I don't understand. He's just, we've all been described as certain things, all of us who have BPD, and I've been described as over-dramatic, but I learned that I really do just have intense emotions. I'm hyper-vigilant. I was described as manipulative because I'm trying to avoid the shame that I feel, which I'll speak to later on. And I've been described as clingy and possessive when the words Tara gave me to describe that is that I fear abandonment. I'm not clingy or possessive, which those have such negative connotations to them. I'm just afraid of losing those relationships. We talked about relationships being so important. Before Tara, underneath this, the animation unfortunately didn't go through, but underneath this I had a journal entry that I had written when I was 16 years old. And when I was 16, I wrote to myself, verbatim, I'm repeating to you right now, "Does happiness even exist? Do I even deserve happiness?" At 16. So on the inside, I was this crying mess. But to my parents, I was very functional, very competent, very, going to NYU, their daughter, they're a great student and working hard. And that was all apparent competence. So if I ever am wondering why, like, have I been gypped by this? Is like, why me? Why do I have to deal with all of this? Yeah, I mean, everyone gets a case of the why me's, especially if you have a mental illness. But more than that, I wonder why my parents or my boyfriend or my friends, why do they have to struggle with me? Or at least that's how I see it. That's a distortion that I recognize, but I feel that it's a big problem. So, no matter who I'm with, my family, friends, my boyfriend, no matter what, I will feel as though I'm a burden. And I really question, do my family and friends and all their close relationships, do they have to change the way they act in order to accommodate me? Do they really have to do that? Because that makes me feel like a burden, and I'm not at a point yet in my recovery where I can understand that them changing their lives is something they're willing to do. I continue to see that as me being the burden. I'll get there though. So there are definitely double standards that I hold against myself, and it's the me that I could and should be if I didn't have any psychological conditions, but who really is in normal control? But I honestly didn't know what to do with that, because there is who I am. That's the person that I am today, living with everything I have. The person who knows she could get straight A's if she wasn't suffering through treatment and therapy all the time, but I can't do that right now. And these double standards are held very high, especially because my apparent competence even fools myself sometimes. I feel like, oh, why didn't you get an A on that test? You know all this material. And I don't credit myself for the fact that the night before I had just had a major breakdown. And that morning, I had already gone through 5 or 6 major cycles between being really happy about something and really immensely stressed and depressed, or not depressed, but sad about it. And so, yeah, I really do feel like I'm leading a little bit of a double life because of the apparent competence. And apparent competence has been studied in relation to borderline, but I feel as though it's a really important aspect to keep on studying, because it's one of the most frustrating things that we seem like we're okay, especially to our parents. How can we expect our family members and our parents to know that something's wrong if we seem so okay on the outside? So I never feel as though I'll be good enough. I won't be the perfect girlfriend. I won't be the perfect daughter. My family has expectations. You ought to get married, you ought to be happy, you should be independent financially, and why don't you work on becoming independent emotionally? I started getting those when my psychological symptoms acted up a little bit more. My parents were trying really hard to get me to be my own person, and when it comes to what I can actually do, I honestly don't know. At every moment, it changes. I don't know if I'm going to be happy. At this point in my life, I feel like I'm going to be in debt for the rest of my life. So, I don't know if I'll ever be independent financially. I don't know these things, but talk to me in 5 minutes. It'll be different. So learning about BPD made a huge difference for me when I attended the Tara workshop, because primarily I was given access to the vocabulary necessary to express what I was going through. Hyperreactivity, shame, just simple things like the amygdala and the cingulate. I knew of them, but I didn't realize how they were associated to my brain. I also realized that my emotions, thoughts, and behaviors were not my fault. This had been started to be taught to me in acceptance and commitment therapy, but Valerie really emphasized this. And because those emotions and thoughts and behaviors aren't my fault, I'm not a bad person. Now, you'll remember I still say I feel as though I'm a burden. That doesn't mean I'm a bad person. I also realized I couldn't count on my perceptions, and I don't have to believe what I think or feel, because feelings aren't facts. And feelings aren't facts is a very true statement, and I have to fact check. That's that's what I have to do in order to verify that what's going on, the situation going on, is actually not just my interpretation of it, it's really happening. And constantly having to fact check was a very exhausting thing to learn. I remember sitting in the workshop finding out that I'm going to have to fact check everything. And I remember learning that we have an incorrect certainty of what other people think. Those words could not be truer. And when I heard that we have to fact check everything, I wondered, everything, always, really, for the rest of my life, I have to check everything? And Valerie explained to us that, and she showed in her slides, that hypervigilance was a skill that was actually necessary in prehistoric times, but we don't live in prehistoric times, unfortunately, or fortunately, and I can't trust my own emotional instincts in the complex world we live in. And so it's very hard if you can't even trust your basic fight or flight instincts in New York City as a 21-year-old undergrad at NYU, to not know whether to fight or fly. Like, these things that seem so impossible, but it's so necessary to my life. Another thing Valerie did with the Ekman faces was she showed us this study by Donegan and his constituents about the left amygdala activation. And if you can see where the arrow is, a borderline patient's left amygdala reacts significantly higher than a normal control's when looking at a neutral Ekman face. And this just kind of extends upon everything that everyone's already spoken about how neutral faces are so hard to read. But when she showed us about these neutral faces, especially that slide that she showed earlier with the on the beach and having a gun put to your head and the different ways people with BPD react, I was so interested in this study I did more research. And since I have major depressive disorder and PTSD, I looked it up and I found out my amygdala will react more intensely to sadness because of having BPD and major depressive disorder. Or I won't react as strongly to happiness because of the post-traumatic stress disorder in conjunction with it. Which causes me to wonder, how much money have I wasted trying to figure out what's going on in my brain if my brain is so different from everybody else's, and there are all these studies out there. And I have, technically 2 more disorders that they could throw in there to study with it. And just Valerie really opened my eyes to the neurobiological aspect of it and how my amygdala really does have a big impact. So I call it negative neutrality. The main example that I like to use is the day after we learned about our reactions to negative faces. I sent an email to my boss telling her I couldn't make it to work because I was too exhausted, and she did not respond. And I thought that she assumed I was an irresponsible, terrible employee. On Monday, she told me she had just not wanted to bother me. So I remembered that Friday what Valerie had told us the day before, and tried to remind myself that she didn't respond to the email, so there was no reason for me to react in any specific way. But even though I learned about this, I still struggle because, meet my boyfriend Mark, who's not here. He has an incredibly neutral face. Now most of you will see Ekman's neutral eyes there, neutral face, maybe a little bit of a smile, maybe, I don't know, I don't see it. I see fear eyes. I see him thinking, oh my God, I'm at dinner with my girlfriend of 4 years and her dad, and I don't want to be here, and she's such a pain. I read all of these different things from him, just this picture of us eating burgers. I mean, it was a pleasant afternoon, but that face is there a lot. And it's very hard for me to read, so I've had to learn to ask him, hey Mark, I'm having trouble reading your face right now. He looks happy, Valerie. He doesn't look happy to me. Anyway, I said some people may see a smile there.
We have to take a vote.
So, really, going further into the shame that we spoke about earlier, I never knew what I felt was called shame. There are two things that I know to be true about my life, and I realize these are cognitive distortions, but there are two things that I feel are true. I am obligated to live for those around me, not for myself, but for those around me and those close to me, my family. And I also truly, truly believe I should never have been born in the first place. Now, I've reached a point in my recovery where I acknowledge that those are cognitive distortions, but they're still true to me. My own existence just shouldn't be there. And when we discussed shame, we looked up a few definitions, and one was when one's deficits are exposed to others and results from a negative evaluation, real or imagined, of others. So those imagined negative interpretations of what other people were thinking about me really play into shame. And Fossum and Mason did a great study, and they have this quote: while guilt is a painful feeling of regret and responsibility for one's actions, shame is a painful feeling about oneself as a person. So when I was sitting in Valerie's workshop, I wrote down to myself, so it's shame. I feel as though my own existence is wrong, and that feeling is called shame. I didn't even know what shame really was before that. I associated it with embarrassment. And that was a huge step for me. Now, bouncing back into relationships, this photo was taken in 2009 of my brother's wedding, and you can tell, I can tell at least, maybe that's my interpretation of neutral face and stuff, but we had a very strained relationship. It was very argumentative. We always butt heads. There were all these problems, and then I had my parents attend the Tara Family Weekend workshop, and things completely changed. Since they didn't come up, I'll just mention briefly one text message my father sent me, requested me to submit some information for my upcoming lease signing, and I couldn't submit the information as he wanted. And I expected him to respond asking me to do several things, disappointed that I wasn't organized or responsible enough, and he responded saying, okay, no problems. This was after he attended the workshop. He didn't put more weight on me. Another text message I got from him was just a couple weeks later. He said, you must be quite anxious to hear about possible surgery. Let's hope your orthotic will work and surgery will not be needed. And let me know if we can do anything to alleviate your anxiety. We love you and you can always count on us. That was a big step. I mean, you can see he did start a sentence with you, but it really didn't bother me that much. It was pretty good. It was a surprise. It was wonderful. More than that, though, even weeks later, after I presented in Boston last month, he texted me, I am really proud of you, the way you presented like a professional. Which Valerie says they shouldn't tell us that they're proud of us. Instead, they should say, what is it?
Be proud of yourself.
You must be proud of yourself. Which, okay, that sounds a little better, but I liked it. And then he continues, I could not control my tears watching you describe your trials and tribulations. I wish I could do more to ease your anxiety, pain, and sufferings. I'm still very emotional, and I just wanted to tell you that I love you. This time you can see, even weeks later, what Valerie taught resonated, and he's saying how this is how he felt, not how my parents felt as a unit. This is how he felt. And I've never had that kind of emotional support from my father before. So this was a family event right after the workshop. We were celebrating Diwali and an Indian holiday. You can see our relationship is so much happier, and I can play around with them, poke behind them, and sneak into pictures. I can annoy them, and they find it funny. If I start crying, they'll understand why, or they'll try to. And it's really great. But I do have this dilemma of how to explain these behaviors and reactions to people, to distant friends, acquaintances, family members that aren't close, teachers, strangers. How do you explain I'm just hyper-reactive. My amygdala is very reactive. I'm sorry, I can't help it. Like, no, I don't know. I don't know how to explain this, and that's the really sad part, that I don't know what to say. And if more people don't stand up and talk about having BPD, having a sibling with BPD, having children with BPD, if more people like me don't stand up here, or like Maria, and we show the public that we're not scary people, no one else fighting to be better for borderline personality disorder will know how to explain this either. So I've realized by going to Tara that I'm not a bad person, and there isn't treatment right now for my disorder specifically. My family and all other families with dealing with mental illness have struggled with misdiagnoses, mistreatment, and misunderstanding from every angle. And that's led me to what I call my BPD crusade, because I am determined to make it so that other people with BPD should not have to suffer the way I did. So a little bit about that briefly is that I'm going to fight to ensure that clinicians develop compassion for their patients with BPD and acknowledge that having borderline personality disorder or any other mental illness is as debilitating as having a mental illness, or a physical illness. I apologize. And I will fight to reduce the stigma of having BPD, which can't happen until clinicians are no longer afraid to treat patients that have BPD. And I'm going to fight to bring the neurobiology of BPD to the public and clinicians' attention, and particularly to the attention of close family members and people suffering with BPD, like Valerie is doing. Because other people with BPD should not have to suffer without access to the neurobiological underpinnings, without access to effective treatment, and without having the words to express their pain, because compassion is so necessary in this, and understanding. So on that note, I would end with the Dalai Lama, because his quote is very applicable to this. Love and compassion are necessities, not luxuries. Without them, humanity cannot survive.